They hurt human children. Humanity declared their species beyond saving. The alarm was already screaming when I reached the corridor. I had been in the middle of signing trade documents when my earpiece crackled and Lieutenant Owen Price's voice came through, stripped of all its usual calm. He said my name once, just once, and something in the way he said it made me drop the stylus and run. My name is Calvin Harris. I was 34 years old when the world I thought I understood collapsed around me in the corridors of a space station called Keth Vorel. I had spent 6 years working as a diplomatic aide for Earth's newly formed Office of Interstellar Relations. 6 years of careful language, careful handshakes, careful smiles. 6 years of learning to bow at the right angle for the Dolhari, to keep my eyes low for the Zenith, to never show teeth when greeting the Ruvel because showing teeth meant aggression to them and friendliness to us. And that small difference had almost caused 2 separate incidents in my first year alone. I was good at my job because I understood one fundamental thing about the universe. Every species had rules, and if you learned the rules fast enough, you survived. I had not yet learned that some species had no rules worth learning. Humanity had entered the galactic Concord 3 years before the events I am about to describe. 3 years. We were young by every possible measure. The Vethkai had been spacefaring for 11,000 years, the Zenith for 6,000. Even the Dolhari, who were considered a relatively new civilization by Concord standards, had forgotten more about interstellar diplomacy than humanity had yet discovered. We came in with our heads full of hope and our hands full of gifts. Agricultural technology, medical research, music, human beings, it turned out, were the only species in the known Concord who had developed music as a primary cultural expression, and several alien delegations had sat in utter silence during our first cultural showcase, unable to process what they were hearing. We thought that was a good sign. I remember the head of our delegation, Ambassador Lena Graves, a sharp and steady woman from Edinburgh with silver hair and a laugh that could fill a room, saying to me on our 3rd night aboard Keth Vorel Station, "Calvin, I think we're actually going to be fine. I think they like us." She was eating something the station's synthesizers had produced that vaguely resembled a bread roll. She looked genuinely happy. I had not seen her look that way in months. "They find us interesting," I said, which was the diplomatic version of agreement. "That's enough," she said. "Interesting is how it always starts." Keth Vorel was a Concord hub station, which meant it was neutral ground, a place where dozens of species moved through daily on trade routes, diplomatic missions, and scientific exchanges. It was enormous. The central ring alone was 4 kilometers in diameter. The outer sections were segmented by environmental zones, each calibrated to the atmospheric preferences of whatever species had purchased residency rights in that block. The human delegation had been assigned quarters in Block 7, which was kept at comfortable Earth standard temperature and gravity. We had 19 people in our team, 12 staff members, 4 security personnel led by Owen Price, Ambassador Graves, her personal assistant, and 3 family members who had been invited on the Goodwill tour. One of those family members was Owen's younger sister, Clara Price, who was 11 years old. She had brown hair and wore the same pair of worn sneakers for the entire trip because she said they were her lucky shoes. She carried a small notebook everywhere and spent most of her time sketching the aliens she saw in the corridors, filling page after page with careful drawings and little labels that said things like blue fin, friendly, and 8 arms, moves fast, don't stare. She spoke to me exactly once on our first day aboard, walked up to me completely unprompted and said, "Do you think any of them dream?" And before I could answer, she had already walked away to sketch a passing Dolhari technician. She was the kind of child who made the universe feel larger and kinder simply by being in it. The Vethkai delegation had arrived at Keth Vorel 2 days after us. I had read everything about them before the trip. Their biology was insected in the broadest sense. though that word failed to capture what they actually looked like. They were tall, averaging nearly 8 feet, with layered external plating that shifted color subtly depending on their emotional state. Dark amber meant calm. Deep blue meant focused attention. The reports I had read noted that bright, flashing silver meant something that the Concord's translation matrices had never fully rendered into human language. The closest approximation was a phrase that most xenolinguists translated as below consideration. The Vethkai had never committed any act that the Concord formally classified as a violation. They operated within the rules, but they did so in a way that made every other species nervous, the way a very large, very old predator can walk slowly through a space and still make everything around it feel small. Ambassador Graves had one scheduled meeting with the Vethkai diplomatic lead, a figure who went by the translated designation of Executor Vol. It was supposed to be a brief introduction, symbolic. We were not expected to form any real relationship with them. They were ancient. We were not. The protocol was simply to acknowledge one another. The meeting lasted 8 minutes and ended with Executor Vol observing, through the translation matrix, that humanity smelled of fresh clay, which our xenolinguists said might be a compliment or might be an insult depending on a cultural context she had not yet decoded. Graves told me afterward that she did not like his eyes. She said they had stayed on her for too long, in a way that felt less like curiosity and more like calculation. I told her we had 2 more days on the station, and then we were scheduled to move on to the Dolhari home system, where the real diplomatic work would begin. 2 days, she said and nodded. We can manage 2 days. We managed 1. The next morning I was at my desk, working through a stack of routine documents when Owen's voice came through my earpiece. He said my name once, just once, and I ran. The public corridor in Section 9 of Block 12 was not a human area of the station. It was a transit zone, open to all species, wide and bright, with the kind of ambient lighting the Concord used in shared spaces, a soft, neutral white that was meant to be inoffensive to as many visual systems as possible. I arrived to find Owen already there, standing completely still in the middle of the corridor. That was the first thing that told me something was wrong. Owen Price was not a man who stood still. He was a former British Army officer, compact and precise, always moving with purpose. But he was standing still. Clara was behind him. She was not hurt. She was standing with her back against the wall, her notebook pressed against her chest, staring at something I could not see yet because Owen's body was blocking my view. There were 4 Vethkai in the corridor, not Executor Vol, 4 others. They were large and calm, and their plating was cycling through that bright, flashing silver I had read about but never seen before. Below consideration. Between Owen and the Vethkai on the floor were 2 children I recognized. They belonged to one of our science staff, a boy named Pip who was 8 and his older sister Nora who was 10. They were sitting on the floor. They were not seriously injured, but they had been frightened badly, and Nora's notebook, she had picked up the habit from Clara, was torn on the floor beside her, its pages scattered. The Vethkai had done it as a demonstration. That was the word the station's own security report would later use, a demonstration of hierarchy, of the natural order of things as the Vethkai understood it. Younger species needed to understand their place. That was the phrasing in the report. Younger species needed to understand their place. The children had simply been in the corridor at the wrong moment. Owen turned to look at me when I arrived. His face was completely, terrifyingly empty, not of emotion. That was what frightened me. It was not blank because he felt nothing. It was blank because what he felt was too large and too dangerous to allow onto his face in that moment. He said very quietly, "Get the children to medical, get Ambassador Graves, and start the emergency transmission to Earth." I said, "Owen." "Now, Calvin," he said, "please." I moved. I got Pip and Nora to our medical officer, who confirmed they were shaken but not seriously hurt. I found Ambassador Graves and watched the color leave her face as I explained what had happened. I sat in the communications room and recorded the transmission myself, every word precise, every fact stated without exaggeration. Then I waited. The Galactic Concord Station security team filed a report. The Vethkai delegation expressed, through the translation matrix, that they did not understand the nature of the complaint. The 4 individuals involved were recalled to the residential block. No formal action was taken. Other species in the human section of the station came by quietly, one by one, to say they were sorry. The Dolhari liaison sat with Ambassador Graves for an hour and said nothing, which was, she later told me, the most comforting thing anyone did that day. 11 hours, that was how long it took for Earth to respond. I did not sleep. Owen did not sleep. Ambassador Graves did not sleep. Clara sat with Pip and Nora in the medical bay and drew pictures of stars and passed them around without speaking, and I think that was the bravest thing any of us did that night. When the response came, it was not routed through the diplomatic channel. It came through the military emergency frequency, a channel I had never heard activated before, a channel that existed, as far as I had known, only as a formality. The message was brief. It was not emotional. It was not a declaration of outrage or a list of demands. It was 11 sentences long, and it was read in a calm, even voice that I did not recognize, and by the time it finished I realized my hands were shaking. It said, all human personnel on Keth Vorel Station and within Vethka adjacent space were to withdraw to designated safe coordinates within 48 hours. Our diplomatic credentials with the Galactic Concord were being temporarily suspended. Earth was not filing a complaint. Earth was not requesting a tribunal. Earth had assessed the situation and reached a conclusion. The final sentence was the one that changed everything. It said, what follows is not a war, it is a verdict. I read it 3 times. Then I looked up at Owen, who had been standing in the doorway of the communications room, and I saw that the blankness was gone from his face. What replaced it was something quieter and, in its own way, more unsettling. He looked relieved. Not because he wanted conflict, not because he wanted anything to burn, but because Earth had heard what happened to those children. Earth had understood, and Earth was not going to look away. I began packing immediately. We all did. The station felt different already, though nothing visible had changed. The corridors looked the same. The ambient light was the same neutral white, but something in the atmosphere had shifted, the way pressure changes before a storm, invisible and absolute. Clara walked beside me as we moved our equipment to the transport bay. She was carrying her notebook. She had filled 3 more pages since the previous morning. Calvin, she said. Yes. She looked up at me with those steady, serious eyes. Are we going home? Yes, I said, we're going home. She nodded once, as if she had already known the answer and just needed to hear it out loud. Then she went back to her notebook and drew something I did not see until much later, when she showed me the page. It was a picture of Earth, small and blue and very bright, hanging in the dark. Underneath it, in her careful 11-year-old handwriting, she had written 4 words. They're coming, she wrote, they're coming. The transport carrying our delegation cleared Keth Vorel's docking range at exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes after Earth's message arrived. I watched the station shrink behind us through the viewport, and I tried to feel something clean and simple, like relief, but nothing that arrived in my chest that day was clean or simple. Ambassador Graves sat across from me in the transport's main cabin. She had her hands folded in her lap, and she was looking at nothing in particular. She had not spoken since we boarded. That was unusual. Lena Graves was a woman who filled silences by instinct. She had spent her entire career turning quiet rooms into productive ones. Watching her sit in stillness, without reaching for conversation, told me more about the weight of what had happened than any report could have. Owen Price was in the forward compartment with his security team. I could hear very little through the door. No voices, just the occasional sound of equipment being checked and rechecked. Clara was asleep in one of the passenger seats, curled on her side with her notebook tucked under one arm. She had drawn for 2 hours after we boarded and then fallen asleep mid-sentence, the pencil still loosely in her hand. I had taken it gently so it would not fall, and now I sat holding a child's pencil on a transport vessel leaving alien space, and I could not have explained to anyone the precise emotion that produced. Pip and Nora were with their mother, Dr. Elaine Ford, in the rear compartment. Elaine was a xenobiology specialist who had been part of our team for 2 years. She was composed in the way that very competent people are composed in a crisis, completely focused on the task in front of her, which was her children, and everything else filed away for later. She had nodded to me once before the compartment door closed, a small, careful nod that said, "I am all right. We are all right. Do not worry about us right now." I worried about them anyway. The military channel opened at hour 3 of our transit, not with another message, with a frequency signal, a coded identifier that Owen recognized and I did not. He came out of the forward compartment and sat down beside me, and for the first time since the corridor on Block 12, he looked like himself again. Present. Focused. "That's a fleet positioning signal," he said quietly. I looked at him. "How many ships?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know the full count yet, but the identifier codes I'm seeing," he paused. "Calvin, these aren't patrol vessels." I had understood, abstractly, what Earth's message meant. A verdict. The phrasing had been clear. But there is a distance between understanding a word and feeling its full weight, and that weight arrived in the quiet of the transport cabin at hour 3 like something physical. "They didn't just decide to respond," I said. "No," Owen said. "They were already moving before we sent the transmission. The 48-hour window wasn't for us." He looked at me steadily. "It was for everyone else to get clear." The Galactic Concord registered humanity's membership suspension 12 hours after our departure from Keth Vorel. The response from the Concord's Central Council was, by all accounts, immediate and frantic. 14 separate diplomatic channels attempted to reach Earth's government in the first 6 hours alone. The Zenith High Assembly sent a personal representative to Earth's orbital station. The Dolhari, who had always been cautiously friendly toward us, transmitted a formal appeal to any human authority that would receive it. I know all of this because I read the full logs later. In the moment, sitting on that transport, I knew only what Owen could interpret from the signal traffic. What I did know, within 18 hours of leaving Keth Vorel, was that the other species were afraid. Not of what had happened in the corridor. They had all filed that away in their diplomatic logs under some variation of the phrase "regrettable incident." No, what frightened them was the silence from Earth. The total, complete, unhurried silence. Humanity was not issuing statements. Humanity was not calling emergency sessions. Humanity was not doing any of the things that a young species, newly arrived in galactic politics, was supposed to do when it had a grievance. Humanity was moving. Our transport was directed to a waypoint station called Meridian Post, a small human-operated facility that had been established 2 years earlier as a resupply hub for deep space exploration vessels. It was modest, a skeleton crew, the kind of installation you barely notice on a star chart. When we arrived, it was not modest anymore. There were 41 warships holding position in the surrounding space. More were arriving in regular intervals, dropping out of fold space with that particular silent precision that large human military vessels had, a quality that I had never fully appreciated until I watched it happen 41 times in a row. Each ship appeared oriented and took its assigned position without any visible communication, without hesitation, without the kind of circling and adjusting that I would have expected. They already knew where they were going. They had known for some time. I stood at the viewport and I counted them, and I felt something I had not felt in years. I was a diplomat. I believed in conversation. I believed in patience and language and the long, careful work of building understanding between different kinds of minds. I still believed those things. But standing there, watching those ships hold their positions in the dark, I felt something older than diplomacy move through me. Something that did not have a polite name. Ambassador Graves came to stand beside me. She was quiet for a long moment. "I spent 20 years trying to prevent exactly this kind of response," she said finally. "I know," I said. "I'm not sure I want to anymore," she said. We were taken aboard the command vessel, a heavy carrier called the CNV Steadfast, within 3 hours of docking at Meridian Post. The crew treated us with quiet efficiency. We were given quarters, medical checks, hot food, everything that professional soldiers do when they receive civilians in a crisis zone. Make them safe first, answer questions second. The commanding officer was Admiral Patricia Holt. She was 61 years old, originally from Leeds, with short gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested she had never once slumped in a chair in her life. She met with Ambassador Graves and me together in a small briefing room that smelled of fresh coffee and engine coolant. She did not apologize for what was coming. I noticed that immediately. She was not cold about it. She was simply honest in a way that felt, in that moment, more respectful than any apology would have been. "You've seen the fleet count?" she asked. 41 ships at last visual," I said. "More arriving." She nodded. "Final assembly will be 63 vessels. We have been planning for a scenario of this type for longer than most people realize." She paused, then added, "Not this specific scenario, but one like it. We always knew there was a non-zero chance that one of the species out there would do something that crossed a line we could not negotiate around." "And children are that line," Graves said. "Children are that line," Holt confirmed. Her voice did not waver. "There is a standing order in Earth's military doctrine that has been in place since before the Concord invitation. It has no formal classification. It's simply called the absolute. It states that any deliberate act of harm directed at human children by a foreign power or entity will result in a response that bypasses all diplomatic frameworks and proceeds directly to permanent consequence." She let that sit in the air for a moment. "Not punishment," she continued. "Not retaliation. Consequence. The distinction matters. Punishment implies the other party will learn and change. Consequence implies the situation will simply not exist in the same form afterward." I looked at her. "What does that mean for the Vethkai specifically?" She met my eyes without blinking. "It means their civilization will be permanently removed from interstellar space, their colonies recalled, their fleet capacity eliminated, their home system sealed under Concord-administered quarantine, which Earth will enforce whether the Concord agrees or not." She folded her hands on the table. "We are not going to harm their civilians. We are not going to destroy their culture or erase their history. But they will never again have the ability to leave their own star system and place themselves near anyone else's children. Not ours. Not anyone else's." The room was very quiet. "The Concord will resist," Graves said. "Yes," said Holt. "They will transmit objections. They will call sessions. They may even attempt to position their own vessels as a buffer. We will not fire on Concord ships. We will navigate around them. We have already notified the Concord Secretary General that any of their vessels that place themselves in our operational path do so at their own risk, and that risk is collision, not combat." "You thought of everything," I said. It was not an accusation. I genuinely did not know what else to say. Holt looked at me for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, something that was not military composure but was also not grief, something in between. "We thought of everything we could," she said quietly, "because we hoped we would never need any of it, but we were not naive enough to believe that hope was a strategy." She stood then, which signaled the meeting was ending. "I'm told there were children in your party," she said. not as a question. 3. Graves said, "They're all safe." Holt nodded, one small, precise nod. "Good," she said. "That matters. That is the part that matters most." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Mr. Harris, you said in your transmission that you want to understand what happens next, that you're a witness and a recorder. Is that still true?" "Yes," I said. "Then I want you on the bridge when we begin," she said. "Every species in the Concord needs to understand exactly what this is and exactly why we are doing it. Not through rumors, not through official communiques, through the account of someone who was in that corridor on Keth Vorel and still decided to watch." I thought about Clara's drawing, Earth small and blue and bright, 4 words underneath. "They're coming, they're coming." "I'll be there," I said. The bridge of the CNV Steadfast was not what I had imagined a warship's command center would look like. I had expected noise, tension, voices cutting across one another in controlled urgency. What I found instead was calm. Not the forced calm of people suppressing fear, but the genuine, settled calm of people who had prepared for a long time and were now simply doing the work. 63 human vessels crossed into Vethka-adjacent space at 0600 on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. I noted the day. Tuesday. Children on Earth were in school. People were making breakfast. The ordinary world was turning on its ordinary axis, and 63 warships were moving through the dark. Admiral Holt stood at the center of the bridge and did not raise her voice once in the first 6 hours. She spoke in the same even tone she had used in the briefing room. Her officers responded in kind. Orders moved through the ship like water through a pipe, quiet and inevitable. The Galactic Concord sent 4 vessels to intercept us before we reached Vethkai territory. Not warships, diplomatic carriers. Their hulls were marked with the Concord's universal neutrality insignia, a layered symbol that every species recognized. Holt had the lead Concord vessel hailed. The Concord representative was a Cenith official named, in translation, First Voice Oran. The Cenith were among the most respected diplomatic species in the Concord, calm and measured by nature, with a reputation for resolving conflicts that had seemed completely hopeless. First Voice Oran spoke in the careful, formal way that senior Cenith officials always used, each word chosen with visible deliberateness. He asked Admiral Holt to stop. He said the Concord was convening an emergency tribunal. He said the incident on Keth Vorel was being formally reviewed. He said that humanity's grievance was legitimate and would be heard at the highest level. Holt listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she said, "First Voice Oran, we have enormous respect for the Cenith people and for your role in this Concord. We are not moving against the Concord. We are not declaring war on any Concord member. We are taking a specific, bounded action against a specific party, and we ask that your vessels move to a safe distance." Oran said, "You cannot simply." "We can," Holt said, not harshly, simply. "We have calculated every outcome of this conversation, First Voice, and they all arrive at the same place. Please move your vessels. We have no wish to put your crews at risk." There was a long silence on the channel. Then Oran said something that the translation matrix rendered as a phrase that had no direct human equivalent. The closest approximation, our linguist told me later, was something like, "The weight of what you are doing is understood, and it terrifies us." The 4 Concord vessels moved aside. The Vethkai knew we were coming. Of course they did. A fleet of 63 ships does not travel through interstellar space invisibly. Their own military assets began moving within hours of our departure from Meridian Post. The Vethkai fleet was considerable. 11,000 years of spacefaring civilization tends to produce considerable things. Their warships were large, elegantly designed in the way that things designed by old and intelligent minds tend to be, optimized across centuries of refinement. They were also, I could see even from the bridge data feeds, genuinely confident. Their formation was aggressive, forward positioned. They were not preparing to defend. They were preparing to demonstrate that the cost of this approach would be too high for a young species to afford. They did not yet understand what kind of species they were dealing with. The battle, if you can call it that, lasted 9 hours. I will not describe it in detail here because I am not a military analyst, and because the tactics involved are documented in full in the official record. What I can describe is what I saw and heard from the bridge. Human vessels moved in coordinated patterns that I could not fully follow, faster and more responsive than anything the Vethkai seemed to expect. The Vethkai had enormous power. Human ships had something that is very difficult to quantify but very easy to feel when you are watching it operate in real time. They had purpose. There is a difference between a force that is fighting to win and a force that has already decided what the outcome will be and is simply making it true. The Vethkai were fighting. Our fleet was implementing. I know how cold that sounds. I mean it exactly as cold as it sounds. Vethkai ships were disabled, not destroyed, wherever it was possible to make that choice. Holt had been precise about this in her orders before we began. The goal was not to eliminate the Vethkai. The goal was to remove their capacity to operate in interstellar space. Engines targeted, communications disabled, weapons systems neutralized, crews left alive and in most cases able to reach escape vessels. There were losses on both sides. I will not pretend otherwise and I will not minimize them. People died. I recorded every name I was given. That mattered. But by the end of 9 hours, the military fleet was no longer a functioning force, and the operation had not yet ended. What followed over the next 6 days was the part that required more patience than combat. Vethkai colonies, 17 of them spread across 4 star systems. Each one had to be reached. Each one had to be given the same message. You are being recalled. Your colony infrastructure will be dismantled. Vessels capable of interstellar travel will be escorted to your home system and no further. You will not be harmed if you comply. If you do not comply, your capacity to resist will be removed as gently as possible, and the outcome will be the same. 14 colonies complied. 2 required more direct engagement. 1 attempted to fight. I watched all of it from the bridge, or from the feeds, or from the briefing rooms where Holt and her officers planned each step. I slept in 4-hour intervals. I ate what was put in front of me. I wrote continuously in the digital journal I had started the day we left Keth Vorel, because Holt had asked me to witness, and I intended to do exactly that. On the 4th day, during a quiet hour between operations, one of the junior bridge officers, a young man named Sam Cole, who could not have been more than 25, came to stand beside me at the observation window. He looked out at the stars for a while without saying anything. Then he said, "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" I thought about it, not as a performance of thinking. I genuinely considered it. "I think we're doing the necessary thing," I said finally. "I'm not sure those are always the same, but in this case I think they are." He was quiet for a moment. "My little brother is 7, he said. I did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. He nodded once and went back to his station. On the 6th day, we entered the home system. The Vethkai home world was called, in their own language, something that the translation matrix rendered as the first ground. It was a planet of deep amber continents and dark green oceans, genuinely beautiful from orbit, the kind of world that reminds you that the universe produces extraordinary things without any regard for who lives on them. Executor Val was still alive. We had confirmed this before we arrived. He had transmitted 11 messages to the Conquered, to Human Command, and to anyone else who might receive them. Most were some variation of a demand for negotiation. The final one was a request, stated plainly, to speak with someone in authority. Admiral Holt approved the request. She designated me as the one to conduct the conversation. I will tell you honestly that I did not want to do it, not because I was afraid, though I was, but because I was not sure I could sit across from him and maintain the composure that the moment required. I was still carrying the image of Clara pressed against that corridor wall, of Nora's torn notebook pages on the floor, of Pip's face, which was 8 years old and should never have needed to look the way it did that day. But Holt had asked me to witness. Witnessing sometimes means doing the uncomfortable thing. We received Vol via holographic link in a secure room aboard the Steadfast. His image was precise and full size, which meant he was nearly 8 feet tall even in projection. His plating was dark amber. Calm, according to the reports. I was not sure I believed that. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. Then he said through the translation matrix, "You are very young. As a species, you should not have this power." "We have always had it," I said. "We simply had not needed it before." He was quiet. His plating shifted slightly. "What you have done is unprecedented in 11,000 years of conquered history." "We know," I said. "Other species will fear you." "Some already did," I said. "They were simply too polite to say so." Another silence. Then, "You ended this over children." "Yes," I said. "We did not consider them." "I know what you considered them," I said, and I made sure my voice stayed level because the alternative was something I was not going to allow in this room. That is precisely the problem, and that is why this conversation is happening from orbit instead of from a table. He looked at me. His eyes, as Graves had said months ago, stayed on me for a very long time. "What happens now?" he asked. "Your home system will be sealed under Concord-administered quarantine," I said. "Earth will supply additional enforcement capacity to ensure it holds. Your people will have full access to all resources within your own system. You will not be interfered with internally. But you will not leave. Not in 10 years. Not in 100. Not until a generation exists that the Concord and Earth jointly agree has demonstrated something different from what we have seen." "That could be centuries," he said. "Yes," I agreed, "it could." A long silence. "You did not destroy us," he said. It was not gratitude. It was closer to confusion. Genuine puzzlement, as if the choice did not compute. "No," I said. "Why not?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about Holt's word. Consequence, not punishment. I thought about what it meant to be a species that loved its children ferociously enough to move a fleet across space, and also loved them enough to not teach them that destruction was the only response to cruelty. "Because this is not about what you deserve," I said finally. "It is about what we are, and what we are is not willing to go further than necessary. You are quarantined. You are contained. The children of every other species in this galaxy are safe from you. That is enough. That is exactly enough." His plating shifted again, slower this time. I did not know what color that was. The matrix had no reading for it. He did not speak again. The link closed. I sat alone in the secure room for a while after that, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and went to write it all down. We returned to Earth 41 days after leaving Keth Vorel. The Fold Space Transit took 16 hours, and I spent most of them at my small desk in my cabin, typing. My journal had grown to over 90,000 words. I was not sure what I would do with it. I only knew that Holt had asked me to witness, and that witnessing was not complete until the record was real and whole and honest. Earth's orbital station was busier than I had ever seen it when we arrived. Ships everywhere. Human ships and, surprisingly, conquered ships. Several of them. Dolhari vessels, a Zenith diplomatic carrier, 3 Ruvel science transports that had no obvious reason to be there except that their crews had apparently decided they wanted to be close to Earth right now. I thought that was interesting. I filed it away. We were given a brief period of quarantine and medical processing, which was standard, and then I was in a transit pod heading down through the atmosphere, watching the blue and green of the planet come up through the window, and I thought about Clara's drawing. Earth, small and bright, with 4 words underneath. I had asked her about those words eventually, on the Steadfast, one afternoon when she was drawing at the small table in the common area. I had sat down across from her and said, "The picture you drew when we left Kethvoral, with the 4 words." She had not looked up from what she was currently drawing. "What about it?" "How did you know?" I asked. "You were ahead of all of us. You knew before any of us said anything." She considered this for a moment. Then she shrugged, in the way that 11-year-olds shrug when they think an adult is being slightly dense. "They hurt children," she said simply. "Of course Earth was coming." She went back to her drawing. I sat there for a little while longer, and then I got up and found somewhere quiet, and I sat with that sentence for a very long time. Of course Earth was coming. The Galactic Concord held an emergency full assembly session 4 days after our return. Humanity's delegation, now led by a joint team of Ambassador Graves and a newly appointed senior representative named Dr. Arthur Webb, arrived at the assembly chamber, and every species present stood up. Not because of protocol. The protocols, I was told by the Dolhari liaison who briefed us beforehand, did not require standing for a re-entering delegation. They stood because they chose to, all of them, old species and young ones, the Cenith who had opposed us in the field, the Ruvel who had been neutral, even a small delegation from a species called the Marathi who had only joined the Concord 8 years ago and who, until 6 weeks earlier, had never interacted with a human being at all. Graves walked to the podium with her silver hair and her steady posture, and the kind of composure that I think is only available to people who have carried very heavy things and learned, over time, how to bear the weight without showing it in their face. She spoke for 12 minutes. I had read the speech before she delivered it, and I had told her honestly that it was the best thing she had ever written. She had disagreed, characteristically, and changed 4 words. She said that humanity had not returned to the Concord to be feared. She said fear was a reasonable response to what had happened, and she did not ask anyone present to stop feeling it if they felt it. She said that what she did ask was for them to understand something. She said, "We did not do what we did to prove that we are powerful. We did it to prove that we are serious. Every parent in this assembly, every being in this chamber who has ever protected something smaller and more vulnerable than themselves, knows what we did and knows why. It requires no explanation. It requires only honesty." She paused. "We are a young species. We have much to learn. We will make mistakes in this Concord, and we will expect to be held accountable for them through proper means, as we will hold others accountable through proper means. But there is one line, one single, absolute line, and now every civilization in this galaxy knows exactly where it is and exactly what happens when it is crossed." Another pause. The chamber was completely silent, 60-something species, thousands of beings, not a sound. "We rejoined this Concord," she said, "because we believe in it. We believe in the work of building something larger than any one species. We believe in conversation and patience and the long, slow, difficult labor of understanding minds that are different from our own. We believe in all of it deeply." She looked around the chamber. Her eyes did not waver. "But we also believe in our children, and we will always believe in our children first." She stepped back from the podium. The chamber stayed silent for 3 more seconds. Then the Dolhari delegation started the response that their species used in place of applause, a low harmonic tone that they produced collectively, and it spread. Slowly, and then all at once, it spread across the chamber, and I was standing in the gallery above watching it happen, and I cannot explain the sound. It was not human. It was 60 species grieving and acknowledging and agreeing simultaneously, and it was one of the most extraordinary things I have ever heard. I wrote it all down. I wrote down everything. The 41 warships at Meridian Post and the 63 that moved on Vethkai space, the 9 hours of engagement and the 6 days of dismantling, Executor Val's eyes and the question he asked, and the answer I gave. Sam Cole at the observation window talking about his 7-year-old brother. Owen Price standing still in a corridor on Keth Vorel Station with his face stripped of everything except something too large and too careful to show. Clara Price asleep on the transport with her notebook under her arm and her lucky shoes on her feet. Pip and Nora. Their names were Philip Ford and Nora Ford, and I want them written here because they were real children in a real corridor, and what happened to them was the beginning of everything, and they deserve to have their names in the record. I want to tell you about the month after we returned, because I think this part is the part that people get wrong when they tell the story later, and the story will be told for a long time, so I want to get it right now while I am still the one holding the pen. People assumed, in the weeks that followed, that humanity had become a frightening thing, that the conquered was afraid of us in a new way, and that this fear would define our relationships going forward, that we had stepped into the galaxy and drawn a knife, and now every species would keep their distance from the blade. That is not what happened. What happened was the opposite. The Dolhari invited a human cultural delegation to their home world for the first time. The Zenith First Council transmitted a formal request for a bilateral learning exchange, a program where young Zenith scholars and young human scholars would spend a year in each other's academic institutions. The small Marathi delegation that had stood in the assembly chamber sent, through the Concord Translation Network, a message that took our linguists 2 days to fully decode, and that, once decoded, turned out to be an invitation. They wanted to show us their home planet. They had, according to their message, spent the past 6 weeks studying everything they could find about humans, and had concluded that we were, in their words, the only species we have encountered in our 8 years of Concord membership that we are not afraid of. Our linguist flagged this as potentially ironic given recent events, and was told by 3 separate people that she was missing the point. She was missing the point. The Marathi were not afraid of us because we had shown them that we were dangerous. They were not afraid of us because we had shown them that we were specific. We were not a danger to them. We were not a danger to any species that did not choose to become a danger to ours. There was a clarity in that which was, apparently, more reassuring than anything a careful diplomatic relationship could provide. Owen Price left military service 8 months after the Keth Vorel incident. He took a position with the Earth School's Interstellar program, a new initiative that was placing human educators on Concord hub stations to establish shared learning spaces for young members of all species. He sent me a message when he started, very short, very Owen. It said, "Figured this was a better use of what I know. Children learn faster than generals." Ambassador Graves was appointed to a newly created position, Concord Child Welfare Liaison, the first role of its kind, established by unanimous vote of the Concord Assembly, which was also a first. She negotiated the charter herself and insisted on one specific clause, which was that the role carried binding authority, meaning that a finding by the liaison could trigger protective action without requiring full Assembly approval. She told me it had taken 4 months to get that clause through. She said she would have taken 40 years if necessary. Clara Price spent the next 3 years writing a book. She was 14 when it was published, which made her the youngest published author in the Concord Translation Network's history. It was not about war. It was a collection of portraits, detailed written sketches of every alien she had encountered during the Goodwill Tour, based on the drawings in her notebooks. It was called Everyone I Met Out There, and it became, somehow, the most widely translated human text in the Concord, 48 languages. She said in an interview that she wanted people to know that the galaxy was full of interesting faces, and that she had been very lucky to see so many of them. I asked her, near the end of my time working on this record, if she remembered what she had written under the drawing of Earth. She laughed, the way teenagers laugh when you bring up something they did when they were younger, a little embarrassed, a little proud. "Of course," she said. "Do you want to know why I wrote it?" "Yes," I said. "Because it was true," she said. It was already true before we knew it. Earth was already on the way the moment it happened. It just took 11 hours for the signal to travel. She looked at me with those same steady eyes she had had at 11, and she said something that I have thought about every day since. That's the thing about us, Calvin. When it's about the children, there's no deliberating. There's no committee. There's no careful waiting to see how it plays out. It is already decided the moment it happens. The only thing left is the distance the signal has to travel. I finished the record that night. All of it, 140,000 words. Every name, every day, every conversation I could reconstruct, and every observation I did not want to lose. I titled it exactly what this story is titled, because that is what it was in the simplest and most accurate possible terms. They hurt human children. Humanity declared their species beyond saving. And then, because we are what we are, we went out into the dark and we made it true. Not with anger, not with chaos, with something much more patient and much more permanent. With absolute, unshakable love. That is the whole of it. That is what happened. That is who we are. And every species in this galaxy now knows it.